Music, dance, theater. It's time to take a seat on the aisle with Tom Alvarez. Hear from performers, producers, presenters, and creators who enrich our lives in the performing arts. Who's on stage? Here is Tom Alvarez to introduce you.
Hello, and welcome to On the Aisle with yours truly, Tom Alvarez. My guest on today's show is screenwriter and film producer Angelo Pizzo, best known for his now classic films Hoosiers and Rudy. Join me now as I go on the aisle for my conversation with Angelo. So welcome to my longtime friend, Angelo Pizzo. I'm so happy that you found the time to chat with me on my podcast. Thank you so much.
Of course, Tom. We go way back.
Oh my goodness. I was thinking it's been about 30 years almost.
Wow. That's crazy.
And we met because I reached out to you. At the time I was producing a documentary about James Dean. And
Yeah.
you were a participant, and it was called James Dean and Me. And by the way, it won an Emmy, and you may not know that it's on YouTube, and it's received, I don't know, over 500,000 views. So it lives on. And James Dean and Me referred to people who had a connection with James Dean.
Right.
And I felt at the time that you would be ideal. Well, number one, you were at the height of your fame because of Hoosiers and Rudy. And I mean, you know, what you represented in terms of being a fellow Hoosier and James Dean and all of that. So it was a natural, and you were a great addition.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And so what was happening that year in 97? Was I right? Had you done both Hoosiers and Rudy by then? I think.
Yes. Rudy came out in 94.
Yeah, and you did both of those with David and Swall. I've got to ask, where is David? And have you guys, and we're going to get into your current project, but where is David? What happened to David?
Well, David is retired. He lives in Bloomington. He actually lives about 2 miles from me.
Wow, I didn't know that. Of course, your name came to mind recently because of all the attention was paid to Gene Hackman's unfortunate demise. Boy, that, I don't know about you, but that really haunts me, you know, the way in which he died and the circumstances around all that. So what are your thoughts about Gene Hackman? And if you will, share your experiences with him on the making of Hoosiers. And for those who don't know who Gene Hackman is, he was the star of Hoosiers, and he played the venerable coach,
Norman Dale.
And so talk about that, would you?
Well, it was, there's a lot to talk about. I mean, just parenthetically, or as an aside, before I talk about Gene, it's interesting that there's a documentary that's being made on the making of Hoosiers. And it's going to be a pretty big deal. I know they have close to 1,000 hours of film already on this. And I don't want to say anything more about that with the financing company. It's a well-known financing company. It will definitely be out in the streaming marketplace sometime within the next 6 months. But boy, we spent a lot of time talking about Gene. And of course, after Gene passed, like 3 or 4 weeks ago, the request came in for both David and I to do interviews. I think collectively we did more than 20. So it was a ton of conversation about Gene. The short version, and I could probably talk for the next hour about my experiences with Gene, but let me just say the abbreviated version. You know, people used to say the Reader's Digest version, but Reader's Digest doesn't exist anymore, so a lot of that reference doesn't land the way it used to. Gene was not the first person who was our first choice. And I won't go through all of the different story behind the story. Originally, it was going to be Jack Nicholson. And then it was going to be Robert Duvall, potentially the company that financed the film wanted us to do Burt Reynolds. It was a constant battle. And then finally, we got Gene to say yes. Gene was in a very tough point in his career. He had made this big splash with as a leading man with The French Connection, and then he starred in a bunch of films afterwards that just didn't do well and almost are truly forgettable today. In fact, one of the reasons we got him was because, as he would say later, no one was hiring him except nobody wanted him for any role except for character or supporting role. So this was the first leading role he had gotten in like 3 or 4 months. And I think he took it out of a sense of desperation. But once he did take it, he carried that negativity into the shoot. And he was really, really difficult to work with. He talked about this being a symbol of the end of his career. He complained to Dennis Hopper that this was a career killer doing this movie. It was one thing after another. He made it particularly difficult on David, challenging him, his directorial choices, more at the beginning than at the end. But Dennis was our champion. Dennis really defended us, really had a vision of what our vision was and supported us and kind of got Gene to every once in a while laugh. We used to call him the Black Cloud because whenever he walked around, he was just like a font of negativity. But I will tell you this, and before I go through, let me just go through, he always treated me very well because he came from the theater. And unlike actors who were much less professional and experienced, he would change lines that I would write, my dialogue, and not think a second thing about it. Gene never changed a word unless he got my permission. And that is the tradition of the theater. You cannot change a word of the playwright until you get that okay. And when it came to ultimately, it was at the end of the movie, this sort of sums up Gene's attitude toward the film and his experience on it. Actually, in his last shot, he got released and got a big applause. And usually the lead actor walks over the director and the producer and the writer and shakes their hands, and it's all kind of love. And he just turned around and walked away. And I chased after him and I said, thank you so much. And it was great working with you, and, the usual platitudes. And he turned to me and he said, I'm sure you and your buddy learned a lot on the movie. He said, but let me just give you some piece of my experience and my advice. People, maybe your friends, family, maybe even people in the state might enjoy this film, but I doubt if anybody outside of the state of Indiana is going to give a shit. And then he went on to say, it will end up in the dustbin of forgotten films. And he said, I hope I forget it by the time I land in Los Angeles tomorrow. And that was it. So it was about 4 or 5 months later, and we were doing a lot of ADR, which is, additional dialogue, because we recorded a lot of his dialogue with crowds. So we need to loop him. And we got the word to his agent that we needed him in the studio, and his agent said, it's not likely he's coming. So hire a voice actor, a sound alike or something like that. I don't know. He didn't suggest that. I know his agent didn't suggest that. But then he said, Gene will only come in if he sees your rough cut. So we sent it to him, and then we got word that he was going to come in and do his job. So I'll never forget, he walked in the room and he walked up to David and myself and shook our hands, and he said, I don't know how the hell you pulled it off, but you did it, boys. Congratulations.
Oh, that's great.
And you know what? He was a prince from that point on. The guy did every marketing request we asked him. We went on a couple press junkets together. We had a great time. He was like a different human being. I think he was going through a difficult time in his life at that point, too, in terms of his personal life. I know. So it was a combination of factors. But in retrospect, certainly from this many years back, we're almost 40 years off, his personal demons that he was wrestling with really synced up with the coach that I wrote. They were both tortured souls. Wrestling with unresolved demons. And his performance is actually extraordinary. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from really well-respected actors. He was there. I mean, Kevin Costner has said it over and over again. Gene Hackman's best actor I've ever worked with. And he's worked with a few. That is Kevin. And I would also say this, which is that it's hard to imagine all the actors that I mentioned prior to this. It's hard to imagine even Jack Nicholson, who could be any better than Gene was. It was one of those magic experiences, Hoosiers, that is where everything kind of clicked. I mean, the whole idea of hiring Dennis Hopper, who had been in and out of rehab facilities for 10 years and had only done a small low budget film in Canada prior to David running into him at a restaurant and engaging him in a conversation. And then he came in and he came up, he said, you know, I read your script about Shooter. He said, I sure know that guy. I sure know that guy. And he started laughing in his kind of maniacal laugh. And it was like, oh, Dave and I looked at each other. We had to have him. But our production company did not allow us to hire him because the bond company, you know, and the insurance company for the film said, no, too unreliable. So we had to go out and get a special writer on top of our regular bond to make sure that Dennis finished the film. So a lot of things just fell into place in our first time out.
The stories that I'm not going to hear, I'll always wonder, that could be a book, you know. It could be.
Well, you know what? There is a book on the making of Hoosiers.
Really?
Gail Johnson. Actually, it's very good. It's like 300 or 400 pages long. I mean,
I'll have to find that. How long has that been out?
You can get it in Amazon.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the documentary and the making of it, it's a really top flight filmmaker who's won many awards and done 30 for 30 ESPN. It's going to be one hell of a documentary.
Wow. You know, I've been watching your career from afar, and I've just felt like many people in your home state feel so much pride for what you've accomplished. And that film in particular, which we all know is truly an American classic, you know, and I know the journey it took for you to get to that point, you know. And most importantly, you know, it's really enjoying new audiences all the time, new generations. And not many people can claim that. Angelo and of course, David, the two of you that work together. I mean, it's in the pantheon, you know. How do you feel about that?
Well, thank you. I appreciate all your kind words. And to be honest with you, I don't really think about it. I'm always focused on what I'm doing today and tomorrow. And
of course, that was one of my questions.
I never ever think about any project I've done in the past unless it's still active. Yeah. And I'm still working on it. But in terms of just in response to your question, something that happened that recently had to do with Gene passing, kind of another gift. Let me go back and tell you about the first iteration of this film. David and I, our cut that we thought was the best version of Hoosiers was 2 hours and 28 minutes long. And the distribution company, Orion, said, no, we will not under any circumstance release a film that long, because those were the days where exhibitions and theaters, they wanted films that could be turned into 2 hour segments. So you'd get 3 showings in a night rather than 2. So they said it has to be 155 and that's it. So DGA, the Directors Guild, had a little stipulation that every director had an opportunity to test one of his films, whatever cut he wanted. Okay. So David pulled that shit and said, this is the cut I want to show, that we want to show. And Orion reluctantly had to do it. So it was like everybody, we went down to Irvine, California, just in Orange County, and just, you know, gave out free tickets to shopping mall people. And, you know, the fact is that whenever you make any film, whether you write any script, whether you sculpt any statue, whatever, honestly, you never know what you got because you're so wrapped up into it. You have no objectivity whatsoever. It's all very subjective. And the only people that had seen the film were our friends, family, and the studio. The studio was shitting on us on a regular basis for a lot of reasons. So It was only then that I thought we had something. And that's when I realized that there was something in this movie that was working, and a lot of things were working. Because the way in which you test a film is you hand out questionnaires afterward, but we didn't need the questionnaires. It was like a standing ovation of like 5 minutes, which is very, very rare in test screenings. And then they filled out the questionnaires, and we scored the highest score in Orion's history. It was like 95. Okay. We came out of that screening and we said, the president of the company, Mike Medavoy, said, well, that sure took us all by surprise, but we're still not going to release it more than 2 hours. We're not going to do this cut. By the way, they were trying to cram in another title called The Last Shot. The two victories that we earned were that we got to use Hoosiers as a title. That was number one. And number two, they allowed us to do our own cut. They were not going to question, because they said, apparently you guys know what you're doing. You just have to take 30 minutes out of the film. So we were really upset, and taking 30 minutes out of the film, we thought really hurt it badly. But we did it because we had no choice. 20 years later, the 20th anniversary of the release of the movie, MGM now owns the rights, came to us and said, would you like to do a director's cut? And we were thrilled we could get our cut back in. The negative didn't exist anymore. The company that financed the film had gone bankrupt, and the negative was, God knows, sold for guitar picks or something. And we were just kind of despondent and depressed, and David called up the editor and said, do you have any idea where we could, any of the existing footage? Because this was way before digital. And he said, well, I think I got the old rough cut, which is like really rough, like film, with scratches in it and stuff that we worked on in my garage. And went back there, and it was that cut, the cut that we screened. And we asked MGM if they could do the color correction. The lab costs were like 50 grand or something like that to do it. Plus we had to hire a composer to score those 30 minutes as well. And that wouldn't be a problem. But the problem was that ultimately, I think the cost was actually closer to 100 grand, and they were uninterested. What they did allow us to do, which is, I guess, was the best we could hope for, is we took those 30 minutes and we put them on the second disc, separate from the rest of the film, and we did an audio commentary on why we wanted those scenes to be in the film and why we ultimately decided to take them out, because we had a gun to our head. But that was it. And I've told this story so many different times, so many different people. And one of the gentlemen I talked to, because I'm working on another project with a tremendous amount of CGI, computer graphic, digital information that needs to be utilized, he said, well, to really conform that old footage to the existing cut wouldn't be that expensive anymore. What you can do with digital tricks and so on and so forth. We also found out that one of the people who worked with Jerry Goldsmith, who's passed, is become friends with us, and he was one of the orchestrators on the original film, actually on Rudy, not on Hoosiers. And we did do a director's cut, by the way, last fall on Rudy, and it's an additional 15 minutes. And this is parenthetical comment. It's going to be screened at the IMAX, the new director's cut, on May 20th. Okay. And David and I will be there for a Q&A.
All right. Wow.
So getting back to the Hoosiers cut, we presented this to MGM, with a new budget, much less than $50,000. And they kept on telling us no. And then, I've talked about this enough. People have offered, I'll pay for it. We've come in and we said, just let us do it. We'll pay for it. No. They just kept on saying no. I don't even know why. Amazon bought MGM. It's so corporate. It's just impossible. People are afraid to say yes to anything in a corporation that big. So ultimately, the reason I'm telling this story is that when Gene passed 3-4 weeks ago, there was a resurgence in the interest in Hoosiers, and it was on, I think, 2 or 3 different streaming platforms at the time, or maybe it was bought by one or licensed by another. And it was the number 4 streamed movie on all platforms for that week following Gene's death.
Wow.
And so David heard from MGM about 2 weeks ago that they are ready to go forward with a director's cut. So
That's,
that's going to happen this summer.
that's wonderful. And where will we see it?
Well, it depends on the time frame and also depends on their market research because there's been some discussion about doing actually a release in selected domains on theatrically. So we could have a re-release of the Hoosiers director's cut at 2.5 hours sometime in the fall.
Wow. Could you imagine what you've been through as young artists and it took all
Of
this
course not.
work?
You could never imagine anything like that. Who
Yeah,
could?
but think about it. Don't you feel a sense of validation? I mean, it's just remarkable. What a remarkable story. I mean, this is like film history, for God's sake, you know? I'm curious, of course. I hope that you and David are still benefiting financially from all this drama.
Not really.
No?
No. Doesn't work that way. I mean, the residual deals that were made when we made that film, when the film was financed in 1985, I mean, we had never made a movie before.
Sure.
So I got paid like $50,000 for the script and practically nothing to produce it. And I didn't get any back end, or I did, but they still show it, the movie in the red. Of course, that's creative accounting. That's what they all do.
Well,
But you
so
know what? I don't look at it. I don't have any feeling of resentment around that
yeah,
because what that film and Rudy have done is provide me with a means to support my family.
yeah.
I still get calls from people who want me to write their sports movie on a regular basis. So,
Well, that is a great segue to the next part of this interview before I let you go. I went online to check out what you've been up to, and I did not realize, and I was delighted to see that you're working on a new film, and it's an independent film called Someone Saved My Life. And I'm so intrigued. I mean, it's based on a period of your own life and your middle school years, and I'm really excited for you that you get to tell, a story based on your own life and that people that you knew. So please fill us in on this film. And when I booked you on this podcast, you mentioned that you're going back to LA soon to work on the edit. So I caught you at a good time. So it's wonderful to know that, I was, of course, going to talk to you about a new project, and here we are. So please tell us what's going on.
well, I wrote a film called The Hill with Dennis Quaid that was I had nothing to do with the actual making of the film, but the director and I are good friends, and he put it on his back and worked for 11, 12 years to get it financed. And he finally got Dennis Quaid to say yes, and then it got financed, it got made, and then ultimately it was like the number 1 film on Netflix for 8 days last winter. And Netflix had called my agent and asked me what I was doing.
Again, tell me again what the name of the film was, please.
The film was called The Hill, and I wrote and directed a film about 10 years ago called My All American in Texas. And they licensed that film, and that film was in the top 10 at the same time. So they were interested in what I was doing. And I'd written a script that was based on a kind of a turning point in my own life when I was 16. And I wrote it on spec about 12 years ago myself, and just kind of, I had a very challenging, difficult relationship with my mother, who kind of controlled my life at that time. And I met a boy in my school who was very charismatic, very powerful, and he kind of gave me the backbone, the agency, to stand up to my mother, who wouldn't let me play football, who kind of scheduled everything. And I was the perfect little boy, and I became the non-perfect little boy, became the rebel, and it blew up the household. I actually had to move out for a short time and lived with this guy. And it was that story that took place over about a year and a half, but I kind of condensed it down to 2 or 3 months. And I wanted to make it where I had total control. And the only way in which I could have total control, I mean, If I did it with Netflix, they have every approval, where I shoot it, who's in it, final cut, et cetera, et cetera. So I decided to do something was challenging, and people kept on saying I was an idiot, and I perhaps am an idiot for doing it. But I raised the money, friends and family. It was a $2.5 million film, and shot it here in Bloomington. And the four lead actors are LA kind of, they're big, they're not names, but they're experienced actors. Then filled in with local theater people, and tried to hire as many people from Indiana as possible. And we had a very short shooting schedule on a low budget film. You have to, in 21 days. But, I think we accomplished a lot. So the fortunate thing is that it turned out pretty well. So the edit is locked. I'm going to go back 2 weeks to do the final stage of post-production, which is mixing, color correction, so on and so forth. So the movie will be finished by June 1st, and then we'll proceed to try to sell it to a streamer or whoever. So everybody asks, when will we see it? I don't know. It'll depend on the sales process and what the distributor wants to do with it.
And tell me who the actors are.
The actors are people that you would never heard of, probably. There are three young actresses that are just starting their career. The lead boy is Preston Oliver, and then West Mulholland is the best friend. And then there's a girl involved. Her name is Ruby Rose Turner. She has about 12 million, she's well known. She's in the Descendants among younger people. So she has like 12 million followers on TikTok and Instagram, so on. And then the mother is played by, I'm blanking out her name. It'll come to me.
Of course, you had a hand in the casting, and how did that work? Did you go out to LA and do an open call?
No, everything is done on Zoom these days.
Okay.
Everything. Yeah. Even if you're in LA, you Zoom cast.
Okay, right.
In-person casting is rare anymore.
That's true.
Yeah.
Is this as a result of COVID, or was that?
It started with COVID, but then everybody saw how convenient it was.
And there's a lot of self-taping going on.
Well, yeah, that's true. But my casting director does all the Star Wars.
Yeah. Okay.
And they cast everything.
Yeah.
On Zoom, everything.
So let's talk about Bloomington. Bloomington has become sort of a hotbed. Did I imagine this at one time? Were you behind a big push to work with IU to develop a film school? And did that ever happen? I don't think it happened. I mean, I haven't heard anything, but did I imagine that?
No, you didn't. I was involved in trying to change the definition of what that school, because the film courses were kind of spread out among, I think at that time was radio and TV was actually, a department at one time. And there was theater, and the classes that were academic classes were in comparative literature department. And then, yeah, it was a kind of mess. So I wouldn't take credit for it, but I would say that I kept on pushing. You need to focus these disciplines into one school. It's now called the media school. So we kind of collapsed radio and TV and journalism and took the courses from comparative literature and put it in one school. But it's still not a film school per se. I think that's coming. But what is film anymore anyway?
Sure.
So
wasn't there also talk about building a studio down in Bloomington?
That was never part of what I had in mind.
Okay. Well, I wanted to mention to those listening that what I was referring to is that, of course, there is a film company, Pegasus, which you probably know all about, and the principals and all. And, they're churning out work, and I think they've got one coming up that's also sports related. Do you know about it?
Yeah, you're talking about the Pegasus, the little 500 film?
Yeah.
I don't know what happened. I thought they were supposed to shoot that this spring. I don't know what happened to them.
Yeah. Well, it could happen to you. It sounds like, based on what I read, and I don't want to have you talk that much about it. I don't want to give it away, but I love the story that you're going to tell about your family, your mother. But are you pals with Jesse Eisenberger?
I know him. I wouldn't call us pals.
So you didn't cross paths in Bloomington? I mean, because he's a big supporter.
I crossed paths with him many times.
And did you know his wife's mother, Toby, and his father,
Very well.
Ben, by any chance?
Yeah. Yeah,
You know,
very
because
well.
Ben was the producer, Ben Stroud, Anna's father. Anna is, as you know, Jesse's wife. Ben, he was a producer on my James Dean documentary, and I gave him a
Oh,
break,
really?
got him in the business. So I have an indirect connection with the Eisenbergers. And so anyway, my point is that Bloomington, actually, a lot people don't realize that there are a lot of like really well-known people on the faculty or chosen to live in Bloomington. Bloomington's hot right now.
You know, it always has been in terms of creatives, artists. It always has been. You forgot Mellencamp, for example.
I was going to mention him, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the music scene is great. The problem with establishing a serious film community is that you can't make bigger films here in Indiana because no tax credit.
Well, I was going to ask you, I thought you might be involved in that push too to
I've been
change.
involved in that. I've been involved in that push since 2007, and I
Hmm.
could, Tom, and you do not want me to talk
Mhm.
about where those tax credits are at this
Mhm.
very moment. I
Sure.
spent an entire day at the State House talking to various legislators and the governor and his chief of staff about these credits. So it's not really worth going into because
Sure.
nothing really successful has happened.
Sure.
Uh, and part of it is just a mishmash of the bill was passed. There was a bill that was passed 3 years ago, and they allocated $5 million in the IEDC to use for tax credits, which is not a lot, but it's something. And they set up
Did
the
it
office.
help you in your
Well,
production?
I got a tax credit. I will say that, but in going to collect it, it's a new regime. And I don't know if they're going to even honor it, though. So
Hmm.
it's a mess. It's a total mess.
I
In fact, after
received.
I get off the line with you, I'm going to talk to one of the legislators behind the original bill. I'll say one other thing. There is a really big movie that should be shot in Indiana, but won't be unless I can get a tax credit for it.
Are you talking about perhaps, and I wondered what happened to it last time I heard anything was a few years back about the 500 movie you wrote. Is that what you're talking about?
Next question. I can't
Okay.
talk, I
Well,
can't talk about, I can't, I will say
I
this.
understand.
There is a
Okay.
500, there
But
is a,
it was reported by the Indianapolis Star. They did an interview with you and they reported you had written a script about the 500-mile race.
I've written 3 scripts about the 500-mile race. The script that you're talking about is about the first Indianapolis 500 in 1911.
Gotcha.
The origin story. It's about Carl Fisher. And that's a movie that has been almost financed and then fell apart, almost financed, fell apart. It's always been on the brink. It's on the brink again. But if we do finally get the financing, unless we get a break, an executive order of some such, or the legislature supports a tax break, we're going to have to shoot it somewhere else.
Yeah, God, don't you hate that? So many
Yeah, I hate it.
movies have been shot in Toronto and Pittsburgh. It's supposed to be Indiana,
The Fault of the Stars.
You know, I got an email recently from, some activists, and they've been at a long time. We have a very active production company here in Indy. And actually, there are actually quite a few people who moved back because of COVID from Los Angeles and stay here, but they had to go back because they couldn't get work because of the lack of support by our state.
I can tell you that I've testified in front of the Ways and Means Committee 5 times over the last 20 years. And that's one of the things that I push, which is that the economic impact is manifold. And you can't really create a film community without the crew, and the crew can't live here unless they have work. So you end up having to go to Cincinnati, which we're surrounded by states that have 30% tax credits.
Hmm.
Ohio, Kentucky, and Illinois. So
Hmm.
there's a great crew base, of course, in Chicago, great crew base in Cincinnati. In fact, I had to pull a couple of keys from Cincinnati because I couldn't find good
Hmm.
enough in Indianapolis. So it's a challenge to make a movie here, even if you got a tax credit. So it's tough. And it's frustrating that the legislature keeps on dragging their feet on this issue, whereas more and more states are instituting tax credits. And
Well, it's always amazed me and left me wondering for politicians who care about the bottom line and
Yeah, but
profit.
there's
It just
also a
makes,
built-in bias toward Hollywood, that
yeah.
liberals and
Oh, yeah.
it's a
There's
red
that
state,
too.
and that's been part of the problem. But I keep on pointing out Kentucky and Georgia aren't exactly bastions of liberalism. They're
Yeah.
Georgia did $4.2 billion worth of business in the
Well,
film.
one could argue that Jane Fonda did us no favors by criticizing.
You're going way back. I think a lot of these legislators
Well,
are not.
no, her Oscar speech is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's too long
She's
ago.
still
There's other
symbol.
reasons. There's other reasons.
Yeah. Are you continually writing scripts, by the way?
I wouldn't say continually writing. The projects I'm involved with now that have activity around them are scripts that I've written over the course of the last 10 years. What I am retired from is writing original scripts that people hire me to write. In other words, I turn everything down. I don't have any interest in doing sports anymore, other than the scripts I've already written.
You wrote one time, though, or you did an interview one time when you said that, at one point you become pigeonholed, but then you decide, what the hell? I'm just going to like embrace
Yeah,
this and make some money and then move on. So obviously, at some point, you said enough is enough, right?
yeah, I did. Although I still dabble in it I supervise other writers. I get hired as a consultant on sports films, but I don't do actual writing. I'm not a writer for hire for anybody else. I turn down everything because if you're a writer, I don't care what stature you have, you're dependent on, I become very close to every script I ever write. And what happens is you turn it over to someone who, it doesn't matter how well intentioned they are, how many great meetings you have, they're going to say, well, I had something else in mind and I'm going to bring in another right. So it's like, it breaks your heart. So am I writing? Yes, but I'm only writing on spec. I do not write for hire because I don't want to hear another note from somebody who knows less about making movies than I do about my own script.
Hmm.
It's not like I'm so stubborn that I don't
Right.
listen. And if someone has an idea to make the script better, I'm open to that. But most of the time, there's just, especially for bigger companies and studios, they're filled with lower level executives who have to justify their job and give you a series of notes. They're just mostly shit. And I know because I was one of those guys at one time.
Oh, sure. Angelo, how old are you?
77.
We're the same age. So we
Okay.
have something else in common. I hear it and I feel it is that isn't it great to be at an age where you can just do whatever the hell you want to do?
It sure is. Yeah.
And you don't have to put up with people you don't respect. That's something I deal with.
Yeah. That's right.
And the experience and all the wisdom, all that kind of stuff too. I mean, I embrace my age. I'm still active, very much so. I still have something to say, and I'm thrilled that you still have something to say. The thing about this film, though, that captivates me, do you feel that this film truly is it a catharsis for you to let go of those demons, if you will, the things that you lived through growing up in those years?
I thought it would when I originally wrote the script. It was sort of therapeutic. I feel like the catharsis, the wrestling with those demons that you mentioned, were mostly satisfied by the writing of the script. The making of the movie, I thought would bring it to a different level, but honestly didn't. And I'll tell you why. Once you cast people who aren't yourself or your mother or your friend, they become different things, and the movie becomes a different thing. It's
Yeah.
not me anymore. It's a version of what I originally wrote that becomes something newer, different, better. Well, just not better, but different. So I wasn't imagining even though I shot a lot of the scenes where they actually took place, including the school, didn't have quite the difficulty or the deja vu that I thought I might. But that was okay because I'll give you an example of something that would best be described in Hoosiers. There's a big journey between the character you write and put on paper and what becomes of that character once you cast it. So the character I wrote for Shooter and Hoosiers was dark, was dour, was depressed, was an alcoholic who didn't have a shred of a sense of humor. He was just a miserable old coot. Okay, and guess what? I wrote it with Harry Dean Stanton in mind, and Harry Dean turned it down. And he is that guy. And when we cast Dennis, Dennis shows up. Dennis is such a unusual character insofar as he had colors that I never imagined. He was funny, he was sweet, he was vulnerable, and he just had a kind of rainbow of beautiful things in him. And he created a character just by being, not, he didn't create it, just who he was. Just him saying those same lines in the Dennis way made him a totally different character than what I wrote. So that happens on the film. That happened on my movie too. So the mother wasn't my mother. It was somebody we cast. It was the same thing with myself, and they all became different people. And the characters and the roles changed because of that.
You did an interview recently where you described all of this, and again, I was fascinated by the way that you described how the actor who played your mother humanized her.
Yeah, she did. That was intentional. I mean, she comes across, as I wrote her, as pretty harsh.
Oh, did she? Okay.
Yeah.
Did it by any chance help you? And I know that you also discussed therapy you had and, to resolve some of those issues. And did it help you in any way to finally accept her for doing the best she could, perhaps?
Well, there are two ways to answer that question. Yes, I was in therapy for a very long time, and my therapist was the one who suggested I write a script about that time. And so it was, as I said, 12, 13, 14 years ago. It's all a blur. And number two, when I moved back to Bloomington, I did have to learn to come to terms with her. And it was, I was able to separate her, who she was as an older woman, not very evolved, I must say, but still a lot less of a force than she was. But to learn to accept her for the very thing you said, that she did do what she did out of love. I mean, my mother, to be flatly honest about, every therapist has talked to her like that.
And you're
She's a borderline narcissist. You can't change these people.
I also read that you showed the script to your family and they said, don't do the script until your mother dies. So
That's correct. That's right.
And so how do they feel about where you are right now?
Well, when I finally did make the decision to make the film, the reaction was mostly supportive. I had two or three of my six brothers and sisters who were one or two that were not crazy about the idea. One in particular was not happy at all. So, but it's the person who was probably least evolved as in terms of their own shit,
Sure. So there's always that matter when you're an artist at your level that there are a lot of people involved who don't want you to air the dirty laundry, even if the names are changed and whatever. So
yeah, I mean, it's very clear who these people are. I mean, there's no getting around it.
So I want to hear about your family, your boys. Are either of them artists or?
My younger son just finished a 2-year acting school in LA.
Really?
He's also is trying to break in to become a professional golfer. So he's competing in a lot of golf tournaments in Southern California.
That's so cool.
But he had a small part in my movie, but he shadowed me. He wanted to learn how to be a filmmaker.
Where did he go to school? Where does he go to school?
He went to IUPUI or IUND now, but he got his degree in psychology. Okay. And he was going to start a golf career, but he injured his wrist to such an extent that his doctor told me he needed to take 3 years off because it was a recurring cyst. So that's when he went to his backup idea, which was study acting. And, he's written a couple of scripts since then, too. So
did he do any productions here locally? Because I am a reviewer.
No, because he's been in LA.
Of course. Okay. And how about your other son?
My other son he's creative. He does music, music videos, hip hop, rap, those kind of things, and he shoots them as well. And yeah, he's involved with a farming system up in Michigan that creates, some interesting.
Any grandkids yet?
No, I don't see that coming real soon.
Okay. All right. So last thing, what is it about Bloomington that appeals to you, having, grown up there and now living there and have been for a while? What makes it special? Because for me, it's very special. I have ties to Bloomington, although I've never lived there. I have a history there.
I would say in no particular order that Bloomington has the kind of it's a small town in Indiana, small town in the Midwest, but it's unlike any other small town other than a college town because of the international flavor of the student body and the professors. There are something crazy like 70 ethnic restaurants in Bloomington for a town the size of 85,000. That's kind of
Yes.
right. That's sort of, again, no particular order. The second thing is that after living in LA, getting from one point to another, going to a play, a production, a meeting, a restaurant, it's like, navigating a campaign, a strategy. The traffic is always terrible. Everything's so spread out. Here, everything's within 10, 15 minutes from each other. So I can go to a Broadway production at the auditorium and be there in 10 minutes. That's another point. A third point is IU sports. Okay. I'm just a passionate Big Ten basketball and football nut. And I'm on the varsity club board in Bloomington. I feel uh, this is a fifth point. I feel very connected to my community. I'm on different boards with the university, with the city, and I didn't have any of that connectivity when I was in LA because everybody's coming and going. Everything's so spread out. There's no real rootedness there, unless you're an old California family. But I don't think even old California families are really connected to their community. They're connected to each other. And then I would say, and something that is really ineffable, but in the best way I can describe it is there is a youthful energy here in this town. This is not a Rust Belt city, as most small towns are in the Midwest. The average age of the residents when school is in session is 21 years old. Okay. And most of the people that make up this town, we're talking about 52,000 students. Okay.
Mhm.
In a town the size of with so-called 85,000, but it's probably a little bit more, 100,000 in the county area. But when people are when you're just around this energy around people, their lives are in front of them. So anything is possible. It's like the opposite of an old hole. If like we just came back from Florida and it was like most of the people were my age and older. And it was like, you just felt like it's a downer. People would just go there to die, and
Oh,
they don't have an energy. They don't have
God's waiting room, they call it.
yeah, that's right. It's exactly right.
I have a couple of friends. One of them went to IU, but they consciously, and I hear this has become like a trend. There are a lot of retirees, people our age, who consciously pick Bloomington to retire because of what you're talking about, the energy.
I'll tell you, there's a story. My mother, she ended up going to a retirement home, and one of the people I met there was a former CEO of a huge engineering military plane maker in Orange County. And his wife was a violin teacher, and that was her love. And the reason they moved back to Bloomington was that the music school. So they
Mm,
had free concerts every night, every single night, either
mm.
not concerts, but recitals. I mean, it's amazing. You can actually go to some event at the music school almost every night of the year, but certainly when school is in session.
Mhm.
And so her bus picks her
Well,
up.
don't forget the opera and the ballet. As
So
we
that's
do,
part of the music school.
I've been there frequently and
Yeah.
world
Yeah.
class. Incredible restaurants in
Yeah.
Bloomington. I've spent evenings there, and They really should have a tagline for Bloomington's. Make it an evening in Bloomington, It's like, it's just special. So you can't say when your new film is coming out, someone saved my life, but what could you tell people to expect?
Well, I will say this. It's not like any other film that I've done. So the films that I've done in the past have a sentimental, if that's the right word, they're emotional. I mean, some people call them tear jerkers. This is going to be, even though it takes place in 1962, so there's a nostalgic element to it. It's a little harder core because I'm trying to capture a 16-year-old mind. So there's language, there's sexual references. It's sort of a combination of a coming of age film and a psychological thriller, and has a darker hue to anything else I've ever done. So don't expect a tearjerker when you come to my movie at this
Well,
time.
you know what? I predict, based on what's going on in the Academy Awards competitions, it's the independents are really, really making a difference. So I hope to see you on that stage, Dave. I mean, it could happen, and I'll be happy to say, hey, I knew him when.
Yeah, funny.
Well, I want to say that one of the highlights of my career was to convince you and David to be in my doc, because it did quite well. But also Dennis Hopper was in it. And
Yeah.
so all of your connection is just
Yeah.
something that
Yeah, Dennis and James Dean were very good friends.
oh yeah. So it's all related. And so I'm just really happy for you and proud of what you've accomplished. So thank you for taking this time, and I can't wait to follow what happens with your new project. Have a beautiful day in Bloomington.
All right, Tom, thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Our thanks go out to our media sponsor, Urban Times. Urban Times is a monthly news magazine which serves as the official neighborhood newsletter for 16 Indianapolis neighborhoods, offering news about development, arts and entertainment, and from the business community.
Who will take center stage on the podcast next? Your seat on the aisle with Tom Alvarez awaits. Follow Tom on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and make sure to visit tomalvarez.studio. Watch Tom every other Thursday on Lifestyle Live on Wish TV, and make sure to listen every week here on the All Indiana Podcast Network.